Hey everybody, how's it going? Hey, today we're going to do something a little different at the end of this video. I'm going to tell you one of my experiences. I've got 40, I think I've got 40 videos up. I would much rather tell other people's stories, but yesterday, the first story in the set was about a guy who had a UFO experience, and it really jogged my memory on a couple of things that I've seen throughout my life. Only two, nothing big. And I thought I would just share that to you. I'm not going to narrate it. I haven't written it down. I'm just going to tell you the story. And it'll be the last segment of the video. So if you want to hear that, hang on. But until we get to that, I've got a couple of Bigfoot stories here that are really, really good. And I want you to hang in there and listen, because these people are having some really cool experiences with cryptids. All right, here we go. All right. This first story is really good. It's short, but I love it. And it's entitled A Troll in Norway. And it's sent to me by a guy who has a Viking name. You know, we have several listeners in Norway and Sweden and in the North Country there. I think this guy's a Viking. Not sure. All those guys are Viking, man. They're big, strong, blonde-haired dudes. And have y'all watched that show Vikings on TV? Ivar the Boneless and Björn Ironsides and Ragnar. Those dudes are tough. I don't know if I could have hung with them. Every time I watch that show, I think, man, I'm glad I didn't live in Norway back then. This story is set in Norway, and the writer says, back in 1988, I was on vacation with some other young people also in their 20s in North End, Norway. I could not fall asleep, so around 3 a.m. I gave up and made myself a mug of tea, and I walked outside. Just outside the cabin was a bench, so I sat down with my tea. I found my pipe and tobacco, and after lighting the pipe, I sent a few nice blue smoke clouds out into the summer night. Suddenly, I saw movement in the corner of my eye, and in the tree line, maybe 150 to 200 feet away, just behind a large tree stump, something with black and somewhat reddish fur was moving. For a moment, I remembered the warnings we were told about bears, and my blood ran cold. I could see its eyes in the moonlight, but not much beside that, since it stayed in the shadows of the trees. I stood up and yelled at it, "Go away, bear!" And then the bloody bear stood up. Being just over 6 feet tall myself, I could see it was way taller than me. Then it took a long single step out of the shadows into the tree lines, and I saw that it was no bear. And I looked upon something from a nightmare. At that time, I had not heard about Bigfoot. It was before the internet, and my only thoughts were about the scary childhood stories of trolls living in the forest. The nightmare in front of me began a low, guttural growl, and then it stopped, and it turned around and walked back into the shadows. I could hear it move away deeper into the forest, and my friends came running out of the cabin asking what had happened, and I told them it was a bear, because if I had told them that I had seen a troll, I would have been laughed at. After watching videos about Bigfoot, I know it was not a troll, but it was a Bigfoot that I saw that night. I have been in Norway since then in the same cabin, but I'm not leaving the cabin at night, and I always make sure the door is locked. Again, I read these stories and I picture everything in my mind, and I know when this guy went back in the cabin, he must have stayed up all night wondering what in the world that thing was. But it's a great story, a great encounter story, and thank you to my northern friend for sending that to me. And I'll see you in Valhalla. Okay, this story is sent to me by a woman who wants to remain anonymous. And she says, although my stories are not from the South, I hope you can share and others find them interesting. First, let me say the stories never were intended to be from the South. It was just kind of a, I don't know, just something I thought would be unique for a channel. But we take stories from all over the world. Actually, I've got them from all over the globe. So yes, this is going to be, I've read it. This is going to be very interesting. She says, my encounters are not about actual Bigfoot sightings, but more circumstantial evidence that they are ever present in the woods and could be just lurking around the nearest bush or tree. For lack of a better name, I'll call my story The Hunting Party. Okay, I want to interject here also and say, this woman has some direct encounters with Bigfoot, and even though she didn't actually see the animal, she's saying that it's circumstantial, but I disagree. I think these are direct contact encounters, and there are a few, and I think you're going to find this fascinating. She begins her email and she tells me a little bit about her life and how her and her mom and dad camped all through her childhood, and her father passes away. And her mother remarries, and her new stepfather is not interested in camping. It kind of choked me up a little bit about her talking about her dad, and I'm not going to read all that, but it's a great letter to me, and I really appreciate it. But I'm going to get into the guts of the letter here. First-time Girl Scouts were not allowed to go on overnight backpacking trips outside the main camp compound. These privileges were reserved for older girls, but once I was old enough, I went on every trip I could. Most trips were 2 or 3 days, where we backpacked to the high mountain meadow campgrounds that were isolated places. Each of the 4 summers I went, there seemed to be some peculiar occurrences. Once, a group of girls saw a dark, hairy animal standing outside the tree line watching them play in the meadow, and they all ran screaming back to camp. On another trip, our pack burros got so worked up over what counselors thought were coyotes or mountain lions that we broke camp early and headed back to the main camp. During the pack up, one burro threw such a fit it broke free and ran all the way back to the corral at the main camp. Another summer, we camped near a Native American petroglyph site. That night, we sang around the campfire, and one by one, we went off to our sleeping bags to sleep under the stars. Sometime during the night, something or someone grabbed the foot of my sleeping bag and yanked it with such force that I was spit out of the bag onto the ground. I let out a yell as me and my bag hit the ground. Whatever or whomever it was, I could not see as it was very dark. It ran off without making a sound. I looked around and saw nothing, but I did move closer to the dying campfire. I'm sorry to keep interrupting this letter to me, but that is terrifying. Now, there are no girls strong enough to do that, and there are no Girl Scout leaders that are going to do that to a little girl. So what do you guys think that was? I think that's direct contact. And she goes on to write, as time marches on, and with it I moved from California to Colorado to Montana and finally settled in Washington. I found my best camping buddy ever in Colorado, and my husband and I camped in all those states before settling in Washington. Here we decided to buy some land in the nearby mountains and build a cabin in the woods. This is where we wanted to retire. My most profound experience to date, however, was in 2013. By this time, I had heard of Bigfoot. I had seen the Patty shorts in the movie theater, but never really believed in any of it. That summer, I decided to camp for a few days by myself and work around our place. It was mid-July and very hot, and it was dry that summer. During the first 2 days, I felt as if I was being watched, but chalked it up to my imagination. The third day, I was walking from the cabin to the trailer, and there was a black, hairy animal standing in the shade next to and somewhat leaning on the shed next to the trailer. I thought at first that it was a person because it was on two legs and leaning casually on the shed like a human. I was so startled to see a person just standing there, I quickly yelled, "Hey, you're trespassing. This is private property." The animal turned, dropped to all fours, and ran off behind the shed and disappeared. I'm pretty sure it was a bear, but for a moment it seemed so human it caused me to have an uneasiness the rest of the day. Okay, I'm going to interject again. A lot of people say that these cryptids only walk on 2 feet, but there are a lot of people who will tell you that they will move on all fours. They run on all fours, or they'll run on 3 limbs, keeping one limb free to grab things and move. So, I don't know. That's pretty good evidence. And she goes on to write, "That night I turned in about 10 p.m. Because it was still hot, I opened all the windows in the trailer in hopes a breeze would come down the mountain and cool the trailer. Most nights you could hear coyotes howl or the neighbor's dog up the road barking, crickets chirping, and frogs down the hill in the marsh singing. This night was exceptionally still, though. Now, we are not naive, and we carry guns whenever we're up at our place or camping. I especially did so when I was alone. I laid my .22 rifle and my .38 handgun on the kitchen table, and then I crawled into bed. It was 2 a.m. straight up when I was startled wide awake by a series of knocks on trees in the woods. There were 4 sets of 4 knocks, with the first set sounding very close and could not have been more than 20 or 30 feet away from the trailer. It was knock, 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 knock. A minute or so passed before the next set of 4 knocks, which sounded in the opposite direction of the first. It was much further away this time, maybe 100 yards, on the other side of the pond. The first set woke me up, but the second set paralyzed me with sheer terror and broke me out into such a sweat it was as if I had just stepped out of the shower. What was it? Who was so close by that they had to be on our property? How did they get so close without me hearing them? My mind raced about all this and what to do, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even move to get to my guns to defend myself. All I could do was lay there and hope I would not be harmed by whoever or whatever was out there. The third set of knocks was the same cadence as the first 2, but closer and again, from a different direction, maybe 50 yards away. The last and 4th set was the same as the others, from a 4th direction and possibly 200 yards away. I had convinced myself I wasn't going down without a fight. I lay there for what seemed like hours, straining my ears for noises, but no more came. The next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the windows, birds were singing, and the clock said it was 6:30 in the morning. I was amazed to be alive. I tried reasoning all of this to myself. Was this a dream? How could 4 people sneak on the property, surround my trailer, and not make a single sound, not a whisper, except for those knocks? I skipped breakfast, packed up, and I went home. Our nearest neighbor was a quarter of a mile away. I drove to his place and told him about my experience. He said that he had heard nothing and had no ideas about what had went on and seemed just as confused as I did. When I got home, I told my husband about what had happened. At first, he thought I had had a bad dream. When I was adamant that I had been wide awake, he said he believed me. Later, I decided to keep this story to myself. Jumping forward a few years to August 21st, 2017, my husband and I were in Baker City, Oregon to observe the big full solar eclipse. A small fair was being held in the town park, and so we decided to wander around and look at the craft and food booths and listen to some music. Then we came to a Bigfoot booth. There were howls and knocking sounds coming from a video the man had running in the booth. I told him about my story. Then he played a recording he had made in the Cascades a few years back, and there, in his recording, was my exact experience from 2013. The same number of knocks, the same cadence and spacing. I about fainted when I heard this. Experiences and thoughts tumbled forward in my mind. I shivered as I began to grasp the full realization of my experience, and I finally had an explanation. Since meeting the Bigfoot man, I'm sorry I can't recall his name, I have looked back on those years at Girl Scout camp, camping all over the West, and the many odd things I experienced, but did not have a frame of reference to help me sort it all out. I have thought out my experience with the hunting party and realized they were not hunting me, but possibly triangulating deer or other game that often crossed our land. We have since sold our beloved cabin in the woods because of age and health issues, but we still manage to get a camping trip or two in every year. Many thanks for providing a platform for our experiences. This is one of those deals where you don't see the animal, but there are things going on around you that you cannot explain. We hear things all the time in the woods, and they're normal. Sometimes you hear a limb break. Sometimes you hear leaves rustle around. You look over and there's a squirrel, or there's a deer, or there's a coyote running through the woods. But some of these sounds and some of these occurrences are just not natural. And you know deep down that there's something going on that you can't explain. And then I go back to her Girl Scout experience when she was jerked up by the sleeping bag and thrown out the front of the sleeping bag. Now that is weird right there. And it's almost like these things are just messing with people. A lot of people say Bigfoot, that we are their entertainment, and I think they know how to get under our skin. That's my opinion. I'm no expert, but that's what I think. Okay, I told you I'll tell you a couple of stories that involved me. I hope this isn't boring, and I hope you enjoy it. But that video that I put up yesterday, and the first video in the set, was about a UFO, really jogged my memory. And I walked around all day yesterday and this morning remembering these two things that had happened to me that I had not thought about in years. The first one happened in around the mid-'80s. I don't remember what year, but I lived in Jackson, Tennessee, and it was a Friday night in the middle of the hot summer. Me and a bunch of guys had worked late one night out in the shop trying to get a job out, and I got off around 10 o'clock, 9 or 10 o'clock, and I was driving home. I lived north of Jackson. I was heading up Old 45 Highway, and on the right side of the road was a softball diamond or a baseball diamond, and there was still a softball game going on at 9 or 10 at night. And I remember how well the field was lit up. Well, I'm driving along in my car, just listening to the radio, and can't wait to get home to see my wife and children. And out of nowhere, the whole sky lights up. It goes from total dark nighttime. Now the area is lit up by all the field lights and the street lights, but it's dark and it's a clear night. Everything turns like it's daytime. Everything lights up, and it shocked me. And the first thing I thought was maybe a transformer blew and lit up the night, but it stayed like that for probably 30 or 45 seconds. And I pulled my car over right in the middle of this and got out of my car and was looking around. I could see across fields. I could see the ball game going on just as clear as day. I looked across the road, and there's a residential development. I could see all the cars in the driveways, the trees in the yards. I mean, it was lit up. It wasn't like sunlight, but it was kind of a fluorescent type of a hue all across as far as I could see. And it lasted for 30 or 45 seconds, and then just like that, it went dark and everything was back to normal. And I stood there for a few minutes looking around, and I noticed no other cars had stopped. The baseball game was still going. It was a girls' softball game, I think. The softball game was still going on, and it's like nothing had changed at all. People were driving by me, and it was weird. And the next day was a Saturday, and I remember we worked on that Saturday. I went to work, and I was telling all the guys I work with, man, did y'all see that last night? Everything lit up. The whole sky lit up. I told them the whole story, and everybody's like, no, I didn't see anything. A couple of the guys were at that softball game, and they claimed they didn't see anything. And it was the weirdest thing. I don't know what could have lit up the whole landscape for that long. It's just weird. I can't explain it. So that's one incident that happened to me. Now, if you go back to the mid-70s, I had another experience. I think I was probably 15 or 16 years old, and I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. And again, this was in the middle of the summer. I think I had just come home from playing a baseball game. I played Little League baseball, or I may have been playing middle school baseball at the time. I don't remember. But I came home and it was dark, and all my family went to bed, and I was just wide awake. I remember being in my baseball uniform, and I decided to walk out in the front yard because it was so nice outside, and the sky was just as clear as a bell. And I walked out in the front yard, and we didn't have many street lights. I lived in the city in Metro Memphis. Even though it's a metropolitan area, you would think it would be lit up, but the area of our street just wasn't that lit up. Sometime during that previous month, the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind had just been released. And that was 1975, 76, 77, I can't remember. I remember seeing that movie, and to this day, it's my favorite movie. I could watch it 100 times, and there's something about that movie that just really, really enthralls me. And one of the things that really impressed me on the movie was, if you've seen it, when the UFOs come in to take that little boy. Do y'all remember that? Do y'all remember the movie? And these clouds are boiling and there's lights behind them. The image of that just blew me away. I thought that was the coolest thing, and still do. Steven Spielberg can really make a good movie. I'm standing out in the front yard, and across the street, we lived in a nice neighborhood. My dad had bought a big house. We had a big yard, and it was a pretty good ways across the street to the other house, and behind that house were huge, tall pine trees. And behind those pine trees, I just happened to look up, and I saw some lights slowly moving straight at me, or maybe at a diagonal a little bit off to my right. But I didn't think much of it. We were in a glide path of the airport. The planes were still way up high when they came over our house, but they did come over our house. And a lot of times that's the way they came. But I just kept looking at these lights, and I just wrote it off as an airplane coming over, but they were moving too slow. And then I noticed as the lights began to shine above the pine trees, I could see the pine trees silhouetted against the light, and I could see these thunder clouds, storm clouds, in front of these lights, and it made me think of Close Encounters of the Third Kind that I had just seen just a few weeks before. And these clouds were boiling just like in that movie, and there were lights behind them, but the lights were white. They didn't have any color, and they moved over the pine trees. They were up about the height of a plane that would come in, and I still wrote it off as a plane until they stopped. They stopped at about a 10-degree angle of me looking straight up, and they stopped, and I could see the clouds rolling in past the lights, and I stood there and looked at it. My heart was beating 90 miles an hour, and out of nowhere, these lights, it was two lights that were pointing forward into the clouds, in the blink of an eye, shot straight up in the air and cast these huge beams straight up, and it just sat there for a minute. I didn't see any blinking lights. I didn't see any blue, white, red little blinking lights like it was a plane. And they shot straight up in the air, and they shined up in the air for about maybe a minute. And whatever this was completely motionless. And then the lights went out, and I couldn't see anything. And the brightness of the light was just normal. It wasn't like super bright or super dim. It was just maybe like the light on front of a freight engine, a train engine. You know, those are bright, but they're not just killer bright. And these lights just disappeared, and then I saw them blink on and off 3 or 4 times. But when they blinked on and off, they were pointing back forward again. And whatever this thing was, every time they would blink, it would be in another position, in another position. They'd blink on, and it'd be 50 feet, and then it was over my head going behind me, and I could still see clouds surrounding this thing. And then all of a sudden they went off, and I heard this hum, this low type of a hum, and then everything went silent, and I could see stars again. the clouds were like gone, and I could see a perfectly clear summer night, and I could see stars. There's a lot of light pollution in Memphis, so I couldn't see them like you see them out in the country, but I could see stars. It's like the clouds were gone. And I remember going in and waking my dad up and telling him about it, and he's like, "Oh, shut up, go to bed. That was an airplane, Cam, just go to bed." And I remember we had a swimming pool in the backyard, and I went out and sat in a lawn chair by the swimming pool, one of these reclining kind of layout chairs, and I laid there looking up at the sky for hours, hoping I would see this thing again, until I fell asleep, and I slept out by the pool. And I woke up at probably 5:30 or 6 in the morning. It was just getting daylight. I went in, took a shower, and did whatever I was going to do the next day. But I have never, ever forgotten that incident. And to this day, both of these incidents, there was nothing in the newspapers. Of course, there was nothing on the internet because there was no internet. Nothing in the newspapers. None of the neighbors saw it. None of my buddies in the neighborhood ever saw it. When I would tell them the story, they would call me crazy, which maybe I am. I don't know. Maybe I was seeing things, but it was the weirdest, one of the most profound things I've ever seen. And I just wanted to share those with y'all. And if anybody else, we're not switching this channel to a UFO channel, but if anybody else has had any other experiences similar to that or something strange, I'm interested. And if you'd like to send them in, please do, and we will get those on the air. Look, Bigfoot, cryptids, dogman, UFOs, they're all kind of wrapped up in the same thing. They're things that we don't know anything about. I think we probably know a little more about UFOs than we do cryptids. I think a lot of people think they know a lot about cryptids, especially Bigfoot, when they really don't. But the UFOs are very well documented, things flying in the night. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of cases of video footage of all this stuff going on. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with y'all, and I hope you enjoyed it. I won't probably ever do this again, but telling that story the other day jogged my memory, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. I think we'll see you guys on the next one. Talk to you soon. Bye.